I want to talk about the First Amendment double standard. Let's go back just a matter of 3 weeks? 3 weeks ago, when President Trump insisted that states should allow their people to go back to church. You should be able to reopen churches and make a point of it. And the media was all upset, all in a tizzy, about whether or not they were advancing proper social distancing guidelines or rushing things too fast, more erring on the side of the latter, moving forward too quickly. In cut 3, here is Kayleigh McEnany, White House press secretary, interacting with the press about that very topic, and see how they press her on that, how they push.
He wants to see all of those churches open in a safe fashion.
The governor does not allow that. Does the White House support churches defying these executive orders?
The president's been very clear. He wants to see churches reopen in accordance with his guidelines.
The answer is yes?
I just gave you an answer. The president would like churches to reopen and do it in accordance with the guidelines.
What specific provision of federal law allows the president to override a governor's decision?
The president will strongly encourage every governor to allow their churches to reopen. And boy, it's interesting to be in a room that desperately wants to seem to see these churches and houses of worship stay closed.
The president said that he has that.
Kayleigh, I object to that. I mean, I go to church. I'm dying to go back to church. The question that we're asking you and would like to have asked the president and Dr. Birx is it safe? And if it's not safe, is the president trying to encourage that, or does the president agree with Dr. Birx that people should wait?
Jeff, it is safe to reopen your churches if you do so in accordance with the guidelines, which are laid out very stringent detail here about promoting hygiene practices, and there are 5 bullet points, and cloth face coverings. If social distancing is not possible, it's recommended. Intensifying cleanings, promoting social distance, we lay them out meticulously. So I am thankful that we have a president that celebrates the First Amendment. The same amendment that gives you all the ability to ask me questions is there to have the freedom of worship, so imams and pastors can go to their churches, can go to their places of worship, and can celebrate what is a First Amendment right in this country, which is to pray to your God and to practice your faith.
And we celebrate that too. I just want to follow up by saying we celebrate that too.
And so we should be thankful that there are guidelines to allow us to re-engage in that behavior.
We're not asking you if the president or people are allowing Americans to pray. That's not the question.
To gather in their places of worship, to attend church services, to pray together. And the president has laid out a clear path.
She's so right about to pray, by the way. It's not just about praying and being in your own home. It's about gathering together. Otherwise, no American should object when other countries, under totalitarian rule, prevent people from gathering in churches, like China. But I digress on that point. The only quibble I have with Kayleigh McEnany 3 weeks ago, and boy, does 3 weeks ago seem like a lifetime ago or what? But Kayleigh McEnany, when she said the First Amendment gives us these rights, no, she was right before. The First Amendment protects the rights of freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion. Those are 3 of the 5 rights of the First Amendment that are protected, guaranteed by the Constitution. But you listen to the media, and the way in which they were posing the question, especially, his name escapes me, the last guy, asking, is it safe? This is the real question. Is it safe? And she says, yes, if it's done in accordance with the guidelines. When we had the protesters gathering at state capitals across the country over 3-4 weeks, arguing that the people, that's not these particular protests that you're seeing on the screen, but the protests of the government shutdowns that we saw for 3 or 4 weeks, when that was happening, when those protests were happening, the left was saying, how dare you, that's not safe. You should not be gathering outside the Capitol for that. But right now, nobody in the mainstream media is batting an eye at all at the mass gatherings of, and let's put them up now, these peaceful protesters rallying together to say what happened to George Floyd was wrong, was murder, and we need change. And in some cases to say some more extreme things, like let's defund or dismantle police departments. Let's disband the police. Now, I'm not saying that the media should be critical of those protests in that regard. I don't think they should have criticized those gathering together to protest their lives being forcibly put on hold by state governments and municipal governments across the country. They shouldn't have been griping about that in the first place, or pressing so hard Kayleigh McEnany about President Trump and his desire for people to go back to churches. But alas, that was 3 weeks ago. Now we are dealing with mass uprisings over an issue that the left deems important. I'm not saying that a lot of what the left has identified here isn't important. There are absolutely issues with police that need to be addressed. We especially talked about that in one of my monologues last week. What happened to George Floyd was absolutely, unquestionably, an unjust murder. And all 4 officers must be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, as I have said from the beginning. But that does not mean that this particular rallying cry is somehow more justified, more appropriate, more righteous than people who have been told your lives must be put on the line or put aside, your businesses may be lost because of government restriction policies, and your rights must be suppressed by the government. Your fundamental rights to assemble and to speak. Those have been under attack for weeks in America. And only now is the media saying for this group, it's okay for you to protest. In fact, there are physicians. There's a medical organization that literally has said that because systemic racism is a massive issue in America, it's like an epidemic of its own, those protests are okay, and they're not going to be raising the alarm about social distancing or lack thereof and the spread of coronavirus at these protests. They're not crying about that specifically because they like the agenda of these particular protesters. You can't judge science and whether or not you should have a particular restriction based on the message being presented. That is the height of double standard. And Kayleigh McEnany in Cut 2 yesterday called attention a little bit to this using an opportunity in exchange with Fox News' John Roberts.
So I would note this. First, Dr. Burke sent me some new information before coming out here that new cases have stabilized, and many of the new cases are being identified through proactive monitoring and finding asymptomatic cases. Today, we saw the lowest new mortality report since the end of March, less than 500, and testing continues to expand with over 20 million done and more than 6% of Americans being tested, and in 7 states, nearly 10% of the population. So we are heading in a positive direction, even as we begin to safely reopen.
But again, has the president seen anything that causes him concern?
I would note again the encouraging signs put forward by Dr. Birx. He's seen the country safely reopen, and I would also just note some of the media contradictions here, certainly not referring to you specifically, John, but just a little more broadly, that there isn't an outcry about social distancing among the protests. And I mean, I saw one network with footage of the Ozarks and complaining about social distancing in the Ozarks, and then seamlessly transitioning into protest footage and not suggesting that there was a problem with the lack of social distancing. So I think we have to be very consistent.
So that was Kayleigh McEnany taking rightfully taking advantage of that opportunity to say, I don't see the media, I don't see politicians talking about social distancing vis-a-vis these protests. They haven't from the start. This is the same Kayleigh McEnany at the very same kind of press briefing who just 3 weeks ago, let's just see a snippet again of this exchange with the reporter. I think he's a Reuters reporter. This is the exact same person, and just 3 weeks ago being pressed about going back to church.
Go to church. I'm dying to go back to church. The question that we're asking you and would like to have asked the president and Dr. Birx is it safe? And if it's not safe, is the president trying to encourage that, or does the president agree with Dr. Birx that people should wait?
Jeff,
So should people wait to protest a little bit longer? It was only 3 weeks ago. 1 week later, people were protesting about what happened to George Floyd. Again, rightfully so for the peaceful protesters. The point here is to say the double standard is clear.